was asking you to tell everybody about how you got your start as a metalsmith and enamelist.
I think as I began to say as a kid, I always had these fantasies of being an artist. The Agony and the Ecstasy was like one of my favorite all-time kids movies about Michelangelo, and I would have other conditions that as a kid you want to be something, but you're not quite sure how to achieve it. And but I had a very strong mother, and my mother was determined I was going to be a lawyer. And I went to NYU for a while, and there was like no pictures in the books, and it just didn't interest me. And I think I finally developed, and then I left NYU and I went to University of Georgia, still in business school, but I think I surrounded myself with friends that were in the arts. And I think just that impulse to be around people that were artists gave me the I guess the guts and the nerve to go back to my mother and say, I want to be an artist. I don't want to be a lawyer, and I don't want to be in business, and it just doesn't interest me at all. And I wasn't very good at it, to top it off. And my mother came down to visit me when I was at the University of Georgia, and she took each one of my teachers out for lunch. And I think they sort of convinced her that I would do okay, for better or worse. And then I got this great letter from my mother, which I still have. I keep it in my top drawer in my office, saying like, I believe people believe in you. So that's all there really is to it. So go for it. And, that's really was the crux of the matter, how I got involved with the arts, but I still wasn't determined what I would be. I was doing a lot of ceramic classes and painting, but I liked the intimacy and the scale, the miniaturization of jewelry, the idea of being myopic, like looking at things closely rather than backing off at them. And I think that sort of world fascinated me. So that's how I began in jewelry. And then jewelry offered like 3 colors. If you're looking at metal, like, silver, gold, bronze, brown. And as I was growing up, I always played with painting, and I really missed the color. And Bob Ebendorf, who was my teacher, didn't know how to enamel, but he knew it existed. And so he sort of pointed me in different directions. There was some enamel under the cabinet at the studio at Georgia. And he said, no one's using this. No one knows how to use it. Just pull it out. I know it has to be fired to about 2,000 degrees, and you just shove it in a kiln and, pray for the best. So I thought, okay, that's not going to work. And I took a class with Bill Harper at Penland after I had a class with Kurt Matzdorf at New Paul's, but Kurt really didn't know anything about enamel. What he knew, and he read from books, but he wasn't a practitioner. And so, I took the class with Bill Harper, and it was like, it solved all the problems that I was having at that time. And then I applied for a New York State Foundation grant, and I was able to bring Bill Hellwig to New Paul's, and he filled in a lot of the blanks. Hellwig people respect him as an artist, and I certainly think he has his dues there, but he really was a master technician. He knew what the properties were. He could tell you all the chemical names. Bill Harper or myself couldn't tell you potassium from potash. It just was a different mindset. But he solved many, many, many of my problems, and I was always grateful for that. And it led me to understand that, what you get is where you experiment. And I had to reject enameling first before I was able to enamel. And what I mean by that is, I really didn't like the procedural enamels. I mean, when I first started with cloisonné, I sort of didn't do any transparency. My cloisonné work was with opaques, certainly with cloisonné, but I didn't want that the beauty of the transparency. It just didn't interest me as a quality. And that's something I think you have to come to grips with. I think before you can move ahead, you have to make some rejections. And this is what I did make a decision about that I was not going to do. And then all of a sudden that gave me some information about where I wanted to go. And the enamel became about materiality, not about process. Process meaning cloisonné, champlevé, all those other ones. And it became about the materiality, the quality that the enamel itself had to offer me. And that's what I sort of ran with.
So I wanted to hear more. So this is a fun fact that I enjoyed learning, that you hosted the first enamel symposium in the US, the Great Western Enamel Symposium. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was mostly about fun and drinking and partying. The Great Western Enameling Symposium was born out of the Rocky Mountain Metalsmithing Symposium, which was the invention of Jim Cotter, a man named Ron Milhone, and Lane Coulter. And these three guys who were all from Colorado, and I think Lane was from New Mexico. But the three got together and said, we should do something. We should have these conferences that no one else is offering without the sort of stigma of having to join an organization. It should be open for anybody. So they began this Rocky Mountain Metalsmithing Symposium. And I was invited the second year it started, which I think was 1979. And isn't that crazy, 1979? Who'd have thought? So I went and I didn't know anybody. Most of them were from the West. I remember Ken Corey, who I absolutely loved. He came up to me and I knew his work. And he and Merrill Comptonski walked up to me, and they walked up to me. The first thing they said was, "We thought you were a girl," with the name Jamie, I guess. So we eventually sort of hit it off and created some new friendships, which opened my mind up about, like, there's people doing crazy stuff that has no respect for, at least not at any iteration, for what enamel or even goldsmithing is supposed to be. These guys were very, very, sort of like a little, not silly is not the right word, but they were confrontational. Their work was a little bit of a stigma that was the beginning of, certainly with Ken Corey, the beginning of pop art and other things that were occurring in the arts in general. So they sort of related to that. But at any rate, I befriended them, and Corey I think was an amazing enamelist, and we started talking about, like, we were part of the Great Western Metalsmith Symposium, or the Rocky Mountain Metalsmith Symposium, but we all thought, Corey and myself and a few other people, we should recommend doing a enamel symposium. So I approached Cotter and Milhone and said we should do a second symposium that's independent of metal, because it's not all enameling is reflective of metalsmithing. So they were a little like, these things cost money to do. You're bringing in 10 more, 12 more people that you weren't doing the year before. But I said, look, I guarantee you that you'll get a whole different crowd of people. And they milled over it, and finally they agreed. And so in 1981, I think we did the first enameling symposium. And the people in it were just amazing. June Schwartz, Bill Hellwig, Kenneth Bates, Bill Harper, Ken Corey, Martha Banyas, Dr. Harry Bober, who was a art historian from NYU, who was amazing, Ed Deeren, Merrill Tompkins, and myself. And so I coordinated, and we did it for 3 or 4 years in a row. and it was like an eye opener. I mean, it's the first time Bill Harper had met June Schwartz. It's the first time June Schwartz had met Kenneth Bates. They began to exchange, different seeds from their gardens because they were both fabulous gardeners. You know, there was just such a thing. And I remember when I invited Bates, he said, "I have one request and it has to be met." And he said, "When I'm done, whatever you have me do, I want a Tanqueray martini, very dry, with an olive and a twist, no vermouth, every day." So we dressed up one of the graduate assistants in a sort of waiter's costume with a cloth over his arm, and he would bring this martini and martini bottle to Kenneth Bates. And I remember him sitting down with June Schwartz, and they were in hysterics, laughing and chatting, and they began to know each other through this symposium. It was like I was 20 something, I mean, it was so enlightening to see a community developing around me. And I really felt like I was sort of being morphed into this community just simply by happenstance. It was quite lovely.
Marianne Hunter put in the chat that she was there at the symposium.
Well, hi, Marianne.
And for all of you, we've got a great turnout. We do want this to be participatory. So if you have any questions you want to ask Jamie, put them in the chat and I'll try to get to them in real time. We've just got a couple questions that we prepared, but really there's plenty of room for all of your questions. So please ask them. This is your opportunity.
Yeah.
That's fun. All right, we're going to jump into some techniques and themes. How instinctual was your shift from more abstract style into your delicate natural studies? Can you, I don't know, is this all connected? Like, can you share more about your signature technique and style?
It's I think any of these things are, you can't, from my mind, you can't anticipate them. I think what you have to do first is know what you don't want to do. I think that's really a critical decision that any artist has to make, that I don't want my work to be this. And then from there, you make some sort of decision about what you want your work to begin to look like. And sometimes that has to do with process. Like I know for myself, I felt the traditional processes like cloisonné and champlevé. For me, I felt when I finished a piece like that, what one saw first was the cloisonné, or they saw the champlevé. They didn't see my images, they saw the process first. And that may have been my own, sort of problem, but it's what I came to realize. I didn't want that to occur. And so I did cloisonné for at least the first 10 years of my professional career. And then it just disappeared. And it disappeared because I found that the absence of those traditional processes opened up tons of doors for me to demonstrate the value of materiality and the value of sort of unencumbered processes. Like, just let the material shine. How do you do that? And how do you linger over a material until you get it to do what you want it to do? It's quite lovely if you feel like you're a little bit of a mad scientist. But I did nothing but try to mix materials like enamel with potash and with, borrowing from ceramic technologies and seeing what I could do with that to make the material bounce a little bit more than it was doing in the enamel processes. And so I borrowed substantially from ceramics, glass, and other areas that dealt with the same material base that we worked with in enamel. And I had, at that point, no trepidation. I just felt like this is what I want to do, and this is what I did. Yeah.
We have a question from the audience. Nancy asked, I'd love to know how you get such fine, tiny lines in your enamels. And then she has another part that I'll get to after, but.
Well, it's a, yeah, that's a tough one. It's a layered answer, and I'm not trying to avoid the question, but I mean, you start, let's just say I'm drawing a straight line. I load a pen with the enamel, and I don't use enamel, I'm using overglazes at that point to do a fine line. Overglazes are simply another recipe for, some people put China paint, overglazes. There's numbers of names for these materials, but it's basically a recipe of glass, as is enamel, as is some ceramic materials. But overglazes are very finely, they're like the difference between sugar and powdered sugar. So overglaze is like a powdered sugar, and I use those a lot. So, okay, so I take the powdered sugar, very fine overglaze, let's just say it's black, and I mix it with an oil that's sympathetic to pen work. And I have my own recipes that I use, but you could define your own. Some people use straight up turpentine. I know people that use crankcase oil. I use a mixture of oils that I like, and they work for me. So I load the pen, I draw the line with the pen of that black enamel. So I have a nice line, but it's still a little fat. By that, I mean the line is wider than I want. So then I switch to a 3.0 or 2.0 sable brush. I pinpoint it to the nth degree. So I dry the brush. I make sure it's no lingering oil in the brush. The brush is as dry as can be, and it's as to a fine point as can be. And then I drag when the evaporation of the oil, the water in the oil mixture from the black, you begin to see it. You just see it as a sort of a conspicuous dryness in what you're painting. And then I can come with the brush and dry and pull that line, probably, I'm going to say 3/4 of the width of the line finer by simply drawing off the liquid from the oil.
Oh.
That's worth $500 right there.
It is.
No,
That's
it's a two-step. You can't count on just the pen. You got to use the brush and the pen. And sometimes I come back again, but you have to be patient. And if I'm doing a piece that has hundreds and hundreds of lines, I'm spending all day doing that. So it's a patient effort, but to get the thinness of the line that I want, you're not going to get it with a pen, at least no pen I've ever owned. And I buy thousands of points over the course of years to try different ones that I think will do the trick. And there's no magic pen point. You need to do the brush at the end. And I highly suggest I use a sable brush. It's a 3 or 2.0, and it's what is this brush? Hold on. That's an Isabey, Isabey, Isabey brush. What's a Kolinsky brush? Any Kolinsky brush, you're doing great to have any Kolinsky brush. They are great brushes. But the Isabey is my favorite to date. Yeah. So
Nancy has more questions. Well, Nancy also wants to know what type of pin wire you use on your pin backs and any fabrication tips that making a pin back setting that won't damage the enamel.
I understood the first point of that. The pin stem I use is a 850 mil stainless steel, half hardened pin back. And I order it from, you could order from Amazon, but I buy it in 6-foot lengths and then I just cut it to the length I need. What was
And
the
are
other-
there, the second part was, are there any fabrication tips for making a pinback setting that won't damage the enamel?
I don't know what that really means, but I do all my settings separately. And then I set the enamel, so one doesn't really interfere with the other. I mean, you do run into problems. Like I just got some work back recently that I have to redo a piece, and you know, you're blind or you're not. I mean, you could say, okay, I could try to do this and close your eyes and hope it happens, or you just say I'm going to start all over again, which quite frankly is usually the case, unfortunately. The pin stem material, I mean, I mentioned a stainless steel wire, but you don't want hardened, you want half hardened, because if you bend the wire to make the stem point down, if it's hardened, it's going to snap. Half hardened, as you bend it, it'll hold that pattern and you won't have to bend back or do anything else. Yeah.
So Sandra's joining from Colombia and asks, can you use ceramic glazes as the same for your jewelry? Sandra, are you asking about enamel, or I'm not quite sure?
You can't use glazes. Anything of cone 016 or under you could use, but glazes, no. You look at the cone firing temperature. 016 is around 1500, 1600, 1450. You could use anything at that cone range, but once it gets above that, you can't.
So Jan Spenceley says, your San Diego group is in the house.
Hello.
Tiny clay shaper, question mark?
My
I don't know if that's an
favorite
inside joker
in
of
the world.
I'm not sure.
Say that again.
It says tiny clay shaper, ... question mark.
Clay shapers. Maybe I lied somewhere along the line and said use clay shapers. I'm not following what clay shapers are.
Let's see. Well, there's lots of comments in the chat too, that you might want to read. We have questions. Are you giving any workshops this year?
You know, I just had, I think I'm hoping I look agile and everything, but I had a 7-hour back surgery about less than a month ago. So I'm doing one workshop at Pocosin.
I always say Picosa, but I don't know.
Pocosin. This summer, I think it's in June or July. And I was invited to do a workshop with the Enamel the National Enamel Guild, and I just can't do that closely. So I'm doing this one, and that's all I'm doing in the States, and only because they're my absolute best friends. I do an annual workshop in Guadalajara in Mexico. And if you have not been there, you should go there. It's the coolest place ever, and the people are fabulous. But I'm doing a painting workshop there in Thanksgiving weekend. So if you don't have a family for Thanksgiving and you want to do something cool, that's what I'm doing. But yeah, that's all I'm doing. Those are the two for this year, and I'm not accepting anything else right now. I'm struggling a little bit. Yeah.
We're so glad that you could join us tonight, because I know we were unsure a couple weeks ago, and so we're really glad that it's worked out.
If you had said like you're going to do this in a few weeks, recovery is a cool thing, but it's slow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Paula asks, why make jewelry instead of just painting?
Man, that is a provocative. I'm sure the question was meant to be provocative, but it strikes me. I go back and forth. I still do a ton of drawing. I was in the midst of a painting career at one point where I was hooking up with one of the better galleries in New York, and I backed off on it out of just pure fright back in the 80s. I think, I'm not going to lie. I think part of it was just simply fear of being in that world. Painting is a very different world than ours is in jewelry and ceramics and enameling. It's my experience with it was scary. I'll just put it that way. The things that were being put on me when my gallery said to me, you have to be here at this time, you have to have 40 paintings finished by this time, and the price point is going to be this, and you're going to have to meet with this person, we're flying you out to this. And I was teaching, so they're telling me all this stuff. I just in fright backed off. And then the gallery moved from Boston, which is where I was living at the time, to New York, and her rent went from $5,000 a month to $50,000 a month. And then a huge decline in the economy hit, and she lost everything. So it sort of ended my painting career. I mean, I sort of didn't want to do it because it scared me. And on the other hand, it sort of ended it in a way that I really was not looking for a new gallery. So that's a short end of the story. I think the other part is painting is very, very different. Just one in the psychology of being a painter, and then also the intimacy of doing and working as a jeweler. I work painterly. There's no question about that. My work is painterly, but I don't elude myself and say these pieces are paintings. They're not. They're jewelry. And I compose around the idea of a jewelry. I don't compose around the idea of a painting.
It's interesting. This really resonated with me because I have a degree in painting, and I didn't even know you could study jewelry, but the part, I know that what you mean with like, it's a different world. And when I like discovered the craft community, I was like, oh yeah, this is like, there's something so, it's not even unattainable. It's just like, there's different degrees that you can participate as a jewelry maker, as a craft maker, that I think it's very different in that art world.
Yeah, and I don't think I never, like, I had this years ago. I'm going to do a flashback. Years ago, I was I was a graduate student. I was at Bob Ebbendorf's house. We were cooking dinner, and Bob's guest was Herman Junger. In terms of the world of jewelry, probably the most famous 20th century jeweler and most important 20th century jeweler, a German jeweler. And he was there with his wife, and we were there in the kitchen, and there was someone else there, and I was passing a piece, which was a sculptural piece, enamel, that I was giving to someone else for an exhibition in Washington, that they were there. And he said, "What's that? What's that?" And so they unwrapped it, and he looked at me and said, "What are you? Like, what are you as a, in this world?" So I said, "I'm an artist." So I just knew that was the worst answer in the world to give. And he wanted to know if I ever considered myself a jeweler. And I realized at that point, it wasn't about just a name, it was about commitment. Where are your commitments? And it's the first time I ever had that realization. And the challenge would have went on for 5 more hours, except his wife, Jo, realized he was way past his bedtime. She took him upstairs. But I stayed there with Ebbendorf downstairs, and he goes, "You know what that was about?" And I said, well, he wanted to be jerky and be like on my back about not being a jeweler. He said, "No, he just wants to know what are you thinking? What do you want to be?" And then I went to bed, and I thought it was about commitment. He wanted to know where my commitments lie. And that's very, very important. If your commitments lie in the vast array of, I'm an artist, I'm a generalist, I can do whatever I want to do, good for you, you know, but I think you really do have to eventually make some decision about where in fact, and what in fact you're committed to. And if you're committed to being a ceramic artist that does sculptural work, that's one thing. If you're committed to being a potter, then dig in, you know, do the best you can at what you can do with that. And then if you're a goldsmith or a jeweler, when someone actually asked me now, someone asked me, my doctor asked me on the phone the other day, I said, what are you? And I said, I'm a goldsmith. He goes, you mean a jeweler? I said, well, I like to make the distinction. And he had me on the phone for like another hour. It was very funny. He was very curious. And I thought I was trying to make him understand. And I was trying to make myself understand a little bit that I feel that I want to maintain a little bit of a hierarchy. I don't do wedding bands and stuff that I buy off the street and just, you know, throw a stone in. Anyway, it was an interesting conundrum for some time. And then eventually I think if people do it long enough, you recognize, you know, what you're good at and what your work is good for. And that's what you stick with. Yeah.
So Barbara asks, who are your influencers? Who inspired you?
I don't know if it's so much who as it is what. I like things. I mean, more than I like and look at people as inspiration. I mean, then history is a huge buffer for my work. I mean, history from a variety of places. I've spent a lot of time in Istanbul. I've been invited to Patakbi Palace to go into their archives and look at the work from the Ottoman Empire. I've had other opportunities looking at different cultures to think about like why we are shaped the way we are. You know, it's sort of fascinating. Jewelry could be any number of things. You could take like a potato and stick it on your chest. I mean, jewelry has manifested itself in ways that are very specific. And most of them are manifested from the way different cultures have either influenced each other or they have made a decision to distinguish themselves from each other. And so if you look at Western European jewelry and say, okay, it's free from any influences from other cultures, that's nonsense. It's totally floated by other cultures. I mean, European jewelry, as well as Eastern jewelry, as well as American, certainly, has been laminated with the impact of the way different tribes have decided this is the way the things we stick on our body should look. And so it creates this like a beauty that it gets compounded because so many other cultures have had an impact on the way we want to see something on our body. Yeah.
So Myra, this is from Myra. Jamie, you've worked with enamel in the round as well as pictorially throughout your career. Can you talk about how form affects the content versus pure imagery?
You always ask the tough questions. Could you say the second part of that?
Can you talk about how form affects the content versus pure imagery?
Yeah, it's a big deal. I think I went through various episodes in my work where I thought about my work as being painterly first. And then the form was really just subsidiary. It was as if you said it was like a canvas back and you just put the enamel piece on that. But there was a point in my career where when I began to think about the electroforming, I was working with the enamel and I really wanted the work, all the work that I was doing. I was becoming really frustrated that it was just a picture. And I mean, to reiterate Myra's question and problem, and I sort of looked at it and I'm like holding a piece up and going like, it's just a picture on a frame. It's still just a picture. And I was really satisfied with that when I was doing my earlier work, that I looked at jewelry as being, the jewelry I wanted to do is just being a painting, a reduced painting. And then I got tired of that and I got more interested in the materiality, the material itself, the enamel itself, and what it could produce. And as I was doing that, you get this sort of raw material as you're firing it. There's this sort of character to the surface of the material. So all of a sudden, you're more interested in the physicality of the material than you are the picture. That's a big change. You're interested in like surface, the rotundness of it, like how it rounds, and you're not looking at a picture anymore. Big change in the way you think about what enamel can do. So at that point, I didn't know how to solve it. And then, sort of electroforming rolled around the corner. And this gave me the opportunity to work in the round, facilitating a physicality that I really wanted, and a sort of a demure to the pieces that when you looked at them, there was an object, not a picture. A really important shift in my mind, because I'm for the most part oriented towards looking at things pictorially. But I love the idea that all of a sudden I had this physical object that was enameled in the round, and this is in the 1980s. It was enameled in the round, and I had this sensation from it that was really beautiful. So that was probably the primary distinction that I was able to achieve, and that I went after, between like something that was more pictorial to something that was more physical and three-dimensional. And it really, to answer it, it wasn't a solution. One was not like a rejection of the other. It wasn't a solution to say this lacks something. It really was a different mindset. And it was a mindset that I held on to for a good 15 years before I began to challenge that as a quality that I really wanted my work to be.
If anyone else has questions, feel free to ask them. I'm going to go back to our questions as well. Can you tell us what the process is like when you begin to work on a single piece? And do you work with like one piece at a time, or you have a lot of pieces?
I go back and forth. I mean, I think when I'm first starting, well, first of all, I work in series. And for better or worse, I don't do one-offs. I don't title pieces individually. I held onto this idea, easily questioned and rejected, but I've held this idea since I began. I would say the series I do range from 5 pieces to 30 or 40. And I titled them with a general title that has motivated the body of work, and then they're numbered after that. So that has helped my means of describing what I do since I began. I rarely do an individually titled piece. They've occurred, but they're really rare. Most of the pieces fall into series, and the only reason for that is I think and proceed serially. Something may capture my attention, let's just say from this Periphery series that this piece is part of. Titles sometimes is very interesting. Sometimes titles come before, and sometimes titles come after I realize what it was I was trying to do. I have a general description in my mind, but they don't necessarily, I have a title, then I do a series of pieces that follow that title. That does occur, but it's rarer. For the most part, I have an idea of what I'm after, like this series, the
I'm going to show this piece too.
You are okay. So
This is the piece that Jamie's made.
okay.
Are you still there?
So
Did your video go off?
there's a collection by this gentleman named Weber, who gave a huge collection of Japanese prints, paintings, and objects to the Metropolitan. And part of his collection was these Kiyoe pieces, which were Japanese paintings from roughly 1670s, 1800s. And the word translates basically into floating worlds. And I was already researching and doing, I'm reading on this Kiyoe works from a number of other resources. And I just love the idea. And simultaneously, I had this chunk of fine silver. It was maybe a 8-inch by 15-inch piece of fine silver in my studio. And I thought, you're sitting on this, you're not doing anything with it. Mess around, like you got a little free time here. So one motivated the other. I can't say I was already interested in this floating world idea, or I was already interested in getting rid of some of this fine silver. But they agreed to happen simultaneously, which was lovely. So I formed the fine silver. I got a couple ounces of gold, and I began to work with that as a background. But what was fascinating to me, because I had never really worked over silver or gold as a background to enamel on, all of a sudden I had another field as a problem. It wasn't just about the surface. It wasn't just about the foreground. It was also about how the background participated in a really active way. And remember, I'm reading these things about these floating worlds in this Japanese tradition of beauty. It was about seduction primarily, and the floating world was equated first to this dark world, where geisha girls lived and all this other realities of Japan culture. But it also manifested itself in paintings and woodcuts. And I love these paintings where these images just sat on the surface of an otherwise gold background or silk background. They were mostly paintings, but the background was always neutral. So I like that idea because I didn't want to monkey around with the silver or gold. I wanted it to be there as a surface or as a depth, great depth in the surface. And you can't see it so much in the piece, but the silver in this piece, the background is engraved. So I'm using gravers and files to create a really heavy texture in the background. So you have this tooth in the background behind these sort of floating floral images that are tied and bound in the center, and they go out to the edge. So this idea of periphery, meaning that the image is described by its borders, in my mind at least. And I wanted that to happen in all these pieces. And then also this notion of this floating image over a surface. So that's how this Periphery series started. And it's probably, which curiously, it's the longest series I've ever done. And it's probably because it was an area in enameling I had never pursued before. Like I kept on thinking you should change the name of the series, change the name of the series to something else, but I couldn't come up with anything that broke from what I was doing. I mean, this started in 2020, and I'm still working on it in 2023. So who knows? Like, I don't have, say, a cap on when a series ends, but I can't resolve the ending of this series in a way that I feel satisfied. So, get over it. Someone, a friend of mine said, get over it, just get over it. Now, you can't get over things that you're still invested in. And I'm still invested in it. And I just rolled out, well, my assistant just rolled out a bunch of gold for me. So I'm Got to give it another shot.
So I had a comment that someone said that if you're covering your piece in opaques, why did you select fine silver versus copper? But it's that you're using a transparent enamels, right? And
Yeah. For these, it's transparent enamel. If I'm working with opaques, 99% of the time, through most of my history, I've used just copper. Yeah. There's no inherent advantage technically to use gold or silver as a background, unless you're going to be using it as a visual part of your piece.
does anyone else have questions? We have a couple minutes left. And I see Nancy did put a link to Jamie's workshop at Picosin in the chat. And if anyone else has questions, now's your time to ask them. And I'm also gonna pop that link in again if you wanted to get raffle tickets for that piece that we just showed from this Periphery series. It may be yours. You may be the lucky winner. We're gonna do a drawing on March 7th or 8th, so you have till the 6th.
I rarely do bonuses, but I'm trying to be supportive. If whoever gets the jewelry piece, I found today that I have a really nice little drawing of that piece. So I will add that to the.
Ooh, you just up the ante there. Thank you.
Yeah, I actually like the drawing as much as I do the piece. But anyway, I'm going to add. I will add that to the. How do you say that?
What's that?
Well, it will accompany whoever gets the piece. I will add this little drawing.
Yeah, there's probably a technical term for that I don't know.
It probably is. Like it's a bonus. But in my effort to be supportive, I will add this little drawing to the.
Well, thank you. That is amazing.
All right.
So we've got in closing questions. What are you most excited about? What's coming soon in your world?
I probably shouldn't say this, but what I'm most excited about is I think my wife is retiring at the end of this academic year. She's a fabulous ceramic professor. So it means we're going to be able to do things together. And then for myself, next summer, August, I will be having a one-person exhibition at Siena Gallery, which will be, it's actually going to be quite a large exhibition. It's going to include a small body of historical works going back to the 70s and 80s. So that'll be a part of the exhibition. And then also a large part of the exhibition will be drawings and then current work. So it's going to be a rather large and comprehensive exhibition that will be in August of next year.
Amazing. So August 2024.
Yes. No,
And,
August 2023.
that's going to be at Siena Patty Gallery.
In Petty Gallery. It's 2023, right?
We're in 2023 now. So is it this August or this coming August?
It's coming August. Yeah.
Oh, this coming August. I thought you were saying it was a year from now. Okay, so soon.
It's
In
coming
a couple months.
It's coming August. Yeah.
All right. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So
those are my two.
oh, look, someone can probably pop that Siena Patty's Gallery. People are asking the address. We can pop that in the chat. I think. And all right, well, if nobody else has some, I'm going to ask one last question. What is your favorite work that you've made? Do you have a favorite?
What's my what?
Favorite work that you've made? Do you have a favorite piece or a favorite series?
I have favorites. I mean, I have series that I wonder, like, it's not my favorites. I wonder, how did you ever do that? It's one of those sort of moments. Like, I think about things that were huge breaks for me. And one of them was definitely the Rocall series in the late 80s, early 90s. It's Rocall, Rocaille. And these were probably the pieces that I most clearly resolve the problem between the enamel being an object and the enamel being an image, which was my conundrum at the time. So the Recall series for sure. And let's see, and you're always fond of the things you're working on right now. I mean, I think the pieces I'm doing now that are sort of the most essential works I've done, trying to resolve this idea of the fragment. In my mind, the fragment is the way we all think, I think we don't get complete grasps of information. And at the same time, as we do get these little fragments, which I believe is really all we get, you try to put together some sort of picture as a result of that. And so I love the idea of the fragment, because I don't think we really deserve to have complete information. I don't think we really earn complete information, nor do we really actually get complete information. So the fragment has been a big part of my work for most of my career. And these pieces I think that I'm doing right now come closest to sort of the beauty of only having a little bit of information, and at the same time seeing enough where you have a certain resolve that this is really quite wonderful, that I'm beginning to get a picture. And I like that idea of beginning to get a picture as opposed to having a picture, which I'm not very good at. Yeah.
In case anyone missed it, in the last Metalsmith, this one, there is a little article about Jamie and his receiving the Lifetime Achievement Award. So a couple people have written their tributes. So definitely check that out. And I think you have work available through Sienna Patty's site. But
Yeah, Sienna
y'all
Patty,
get raffle tickets and see if you can get this piece first.
yeah. Yeah, but you can see my work through Sienna and through Mauer Zidioli Gallery in Munich, my other representation. But yeah, you're gonna get this bonus drawing.
Gonna be a bonus drawing now. That is amazing. Well, thank you so much, Jamie, for taking the time to share about all your knowledge, your tips, and your history. It was such a pleasure to have you, and thank you everyone for joining. And yeah, I guess